Entry-level jobs are dead. According to the US Chamber of Commerce, half of companies are no longer willing to hire or train entry-level employees, with the average age of new hires now sitting at 42 years old. Not only that, but LinkedIn's own data suggests that a majority of entry-level jobs on the platform aren't even real, with over 40% of companies admitting to posting fake entry-level jobs, also known as ghost listings, and another third of entry-level jobs asking for at least 3 to 5 years of relevant experience before even applying. See, the United States is going through what economists call a frozen job market, meaning that no one gets hired and no one quits, which drives down job openings, stagnates wages, and leaves behind the millions of young adults who are now 1 month away from finishing high school or college, only to graduate into unemployment, which begs 3 very important questions. Why is this happening? Who's going to be qualified to do all of the jobs in 20 years once the baby boomers are finally gone? And what can you do now that the entry-level job market is dead? So right off the bat, I want to make it clear that almost any excuse that a CEO gives for why entry-level jobs are going away is bull. Before YouTube, I spent 8 years professionally researching, consulting, and teaching about the job market. And what we are seeing with entry-level jobs going away is not some new phenomenon being brought about by artificial intelligence, a failure of the education system, or even some skills gap where companies cannot find adequate American workers. Those are just excuses to hide the fact that corporate laziness, perverse tax incentives, political fear-mongering, and line must go up thinking have led companies to completely sabotage their long-term viability in exchange for short-term quarterly returns. And I will translate all of that into English in just a minute. But first, let's break down each of those excuses one by one so that we're on the same page about where the job market actually is today. So in 2026, a lot of people, especially on LinkedIn, say that AI is to blame, that artificial intelligence is simply replacing jobs that are lower on the corporate ladder, and that this collapse in the job market is no different than what happened during the Industrial Revolution or the dot-com boom. But this is largely untrue. Leading research shows that only 1.1% of jobs that are exposed to AI have been proven to be completely replaceable by it. And in fact, many of the hiring freezes or layoffs, quote-unquote, caused by AI are really just the result of companies recklessly spending money on AI tools last year that were never able to deliver a real return on investment, leading companies to either backtrack and secretly rehire a bunch of the staff that they laid off, or double down and simply force all of their current employees to take on their former colleagues' job duties without any increase in pay because the company literally cannot afford to hire new workers anymore. And since workers are scared to death of the aforementioned frozen job market, they are not willing to quit their jobs, even though they're taking on more job duties without any increase in pay. Now, I don't know about you, but that sure sounds like a ticking time bomb to me. But the possibility of an upcoming major recession would be a topic for a whole other video. When it comes to entry-level jobs, other CEOs, especially in tech, will argue that the education system is to blame for entry-level jobs going away, saying that young adults simply aren't prepared to enter today's technical workforce, and that it's not the company's job to provide young people with the skills that they need to do the work. And look, I gotta give credit where it's due because that is some top-tier rage bait, which sounds good in theory, but in practice, things could not be further from the truth. For starters, there is not a skills gap in the United States. The US is home to over 340 million people and nearly 4,000 universities and technical schools, not to mention the fact that we have hundreds of companies that provide online micro-credentials for relatively cheap and access to all of the world's knowledge on websites like YouTube and Wikipedia, which are overwhelmingly published in English. If any country on earth does not have a skills gap, it is the United States of America. CEOs only claim that there's a skills gap because they don't want to pay American workers the salary that they are actually worth in the 6th most expensive country on the planet. And they know that if they can gaslight schools into teaching all of their kids how to #learn to code, despite the fact that only 2% of jobs require any coding as part of their job duties, then that means that 20 years down the line, they can start laying off all of those software engineers who used to get paid $200,000 a year to instead replace them with cheaper high school grads, which is exactly what we are seeing in the tech sector today. But I digress. If the traditional education system was failing young Americans, then we would see that reflected in the data, but we just don't. In fact, students who do go out and get 2-year technical degrees often have worse career outcomes than people who never went to college at all. I you not. And they often make millions of dollars less than people with a traditional bachelor's degree over the course of their entire careers. And just to add insult to injury, people with 2-year degrees often have the hardest time paying them back, despite having a smaller student debt burden than people with 4-year or master's degrees, which, if you're curious, is called the student debt paradox. And there are a whole bunch of reasons for this, some of which are more obvious, like the fact that universities are just better equipped to attract recruiters, career fairs, and internship openings to their campuses in a way that community colleges and technical schools are not. And then others are less obvious, but in my opinion, are still just as important, like the fact that simply spending more time as a student gives you more opportunities to mature and to participate in experiential learning than someone who goes straight into the workforce. And the fact that over a quarter of all couples actually get married in college, which gives you access to both a support network and a 2-income household with higher earning potential because you both have college degrees, which all compounds into Americans with a traditional education just performing infinitely better than those who don't once all is said and done. And don't get me wrong, I love the idea of vocational programs, technical schools, and cheaper, shorter college degrees, but there just isn't compelling evidence that these types of programs improve people's career outcomes or make young adults better prepared to enter the workforce. No, the real reason why companies are no longer hiring young adults is corporate laziness. Ever since the late 1970s, perverse incentives in politics, tax structures, and corporate subsidies have completely disincentivized companies from participating in the good version of free market capitalism that people online like to fantasize about. Ever since Reaganomics took over the American economy, wages became completely detached from productivity, and the American worker became obligated to financially subsidize their own employers by spending $181 billion tax dollars every year on corporate welfare. Combine that with Citizens United, corporate lobbying, and quite frankly, propaganda meant to trick Americans into being upset about some BS culture war, as opposed to getting angry at billionaires, and we now live in a country where Gen Z is 3 times poorer than baby boomers, where politics is just a game for the top 0.01%, and where companies do crazy just to make shareholders happy, like posting fake job listings to LinkedIn and Indeed to pretend that the company is growing, when really they have no intention of hiring anyone, and are just waiting until they too can get bought by one of the 12 different companies that own literally everything else. Not to mention the fact that fewer companies are even willing to hire interns, destroying yet another rung on the corporate ladder and making it that much harder for young adults to successfully launch their careers. So what can you or your loved ones do now that the entry-level job market is actively collapsing in front of us? Well, for starters, I'll tell you what you can't do. You cannot apply to jobs like it's 2015. Auto-submitting your resume to public online job boards just doesn't work anymore. In fact, the odds that a single resume submitted somewhere like LinkedIn or Indeed will land to a job is only 1 in 514. And the reason for that is because only 1/3 of real job openings actually get posted to online job boards, whereas only 3% of online applicants get brought in for an interview, and only 48% of those interviewed actually get offered a job, which does make sense, but still creates a resume to hire ratio of 0.19%. Those are horrible odds. And so if you want to succeed in today's job market, then you need to do one of two different things, which are A, learn how to tap into the so-called hidden job market that labor economists like me are always going on about, and B, learn how to make yourself competitive, even if you don't have any quote-unquote real work experience in your target industry. Okay, so what is the hidden job market? Personally, I hate this term, but really all this is describing is the fact that 73% of job openings do not get posted to public online job boards, and are instead filled through things like internal promotions, networking events, internship pipelines, university partnerships, or via talent acquisition recruiters, most of whom are operating through a combination of LinkedIn messaging and corporate email. This type of narrow hiring pipeline is extremely common in fields that offer full-time, salaried jobs with good benefits and total compensation packages. And so if that's what you're going for, then you need to do your research and find out how your target industry is actually hiring people. If they employ a bunch of talent acquisition recruiters, then you need to be optimizing your LinkedIn account and connecting with those recruiters as often as you can. If a company is heavily involved in professional organizations, then you need to be going to conferences and showcases where you can actually network with hiring managers face to face, because that's where a ton of the hidden job market hiring takes place. And if you are a college student at a major 4-year university, then you need to be going to career fairs, info sessions, and other hiring events that your college puts on, because they are investing millions of dollars into career services personnel, like I once was, in order to ensure that their university maintains a high placement rate. And if you are in your 30s and just chronically underemployed, then you need to start targeting unsaturated channels in your job search. Google just isn't going to hire you right now. I am sorry, bro. But you know who might? Small businesses, local firms, hell, even government jobs at the city and state level. These might not be your dream job, but they are a phenomenal way to earn a steady paycheck without having to constantly worry about layoffs like we see in business and tech. But this is where a lot of people say, okay, Alex, that's great, but how do I actually get hired for those experiences when I don't have any real experience? And this is where we need to start playing the career game a little more creatively. Because you're right, true entry-level jobs are collapsing at the same time that companies are refusing to hire or train younger employees. Like I said before, the average age of new hires is now sitting at 42 years old. So what is a Zoomer to do? Well, you need to start cramming your resume full of tangentially related experiences that do not require you to get formally hired somewhere, volunteering with organizations that will take anyone, joining clubs that will take anyone, and doing personal projects that can be done by anyone with your skill set. For example, if you want to get into marketing, then volunteer with a local nonprofit, and after you volunteered for a few months and gained a little trust, offer to start managing their social media accounts. That is going to build a portfolio of experiences that you can then quantify on your resume. And then, if you have the ability, go join a group like the American Marketing Association and start attending their in-person events. That is how you start building a network and gaining access to those openings that are not getting listed on places like LinkedIn or Indeed. And yeah, this is going to take some time and cost some money, but that is unfortunately how things are in 2026. Personally, I used to serve as an executive board member for the Utah branch of the National Career Development Association, and I used to serve on the sponsorship committee of the Mountain Pacific branch of the National Association of Colleges and Employers. I have been flown all across America, I have consulted politicians and CEOs alike on the job market, and I have fundraised millions of dollars. And you know how much money I got paid for any of that? $0. But that wasn't the point. The point was to do interesting things and become crazy impressive on paper. And honestly, this is a big part of why you guys now trust me to talk about things like job market economics, because I have seen the nitty-gritty of how all of this stuff works from the inside. And so if you or your loved ones want to be able to launch a well-paying, flourishing career in 2026, then the best way to do that is by figuring out what sorts of things your target industry values and then volunteering your time strategically, because that is honestly the best way to get ahead now that the entry-level job market is dead.